Hey Toby, what do you want to do today?
Exactly the same as every day, Bibi. We will conquer the world.
But we already did that yesterday, didn't we?
Really? Then, well, what about talking about creativity? Cars can't fly? We show you that with creativity, everything is possible and that this wonderful ability is in every single one of us.
Listen now and learn more about your personal creative ability and its importance for you, for organizations, and for society.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode on Talking Creativity. We're here, unfortunately, again, without Bianca, the lovely Bibi you probably know. She's sick, but I'm here with another wonderful guest. And I have prepared, as in long tradition actually, a little introduction. This time we just gathered some questions from our guest. And with a little help of AI, ChatGPT, we tried to formulate a little introduction. So let's see what came out of this. We've got an exciting guest in the studio today. He's the genius behind the startup Kekz. Is that pronounced correctly? I don't know. It's an on-the-go children's headphone system. The TV host RTL even calls it the Walkman for the generation Paw Patrol. He rocked the Bachelor of Science in Industrial Design, lived 5 years in the buzzing hub of Shenzhen in China. In 2012, he brought his talents to Munich, wonderful city in Germany, working with West Wing to launch their private label collection. Since then, he's been the go-to consultant for startups, including his own venture. When asked if he's creative, his response is a confident, of course. As for nicknames, he doesn't have an official one, but his grandmother lovingly called him Mothy. I don't know if that's pronounced correctly, but as his middle name is Timothy, I think that totally makes sense. His best childhood memories are of his grandfather's garage, building things and creating magic. So I'm not sure if I'm going to see a magic trick today, but let's see. We're looking forward to an exciting chat about creativity, especially about creative problem solving in a startup. But coming from a design perspective, going your way through in more like corporate world and startup life, from like generating little ideas to scaling up production. Please welcome the wonderful Adin Mumma to our new episode of Talking Creativity. Dear Adin, thank you very much for making time to join us today live in Munich.
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. I'm glad to be here.
Is that like a nice way of putting it out there? Who you are, what you've done in your life? Is there anything missing? Is there anything incorrect?
I have to say this intro was very creative.
Even though ChatGPT supported a little bit here.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very interesting to have ChatGPT introduce me.
Wonderful. So Adin, of course, we're talking about creativity here. It's called Talking Creativity. So the first and foremost, most important question is always, what is creativity to you?
Yeah, so I believe that creativity is really a way of looking at the world.
Uh-huh. It's like putting on glasses?
Yeah, it's putting on your creative glasses. You sort of look at the world differently. Mm-hmm. And it's the way that you sort of express that to other people, where people say, hey, that's a unique way of looking at things. That's very creative. And so that to me is what creativity is.
So did you get that by birth, or did you grow up in a let's say like very creative environment with a very creative father or mother or family? How did it come that you would say that you're very creative?
Yeah. So my mother's very creative. She's into art. She's into painting. When she sees something that somebody else created, she would also try to learn the skills to create that as well. She would take a lot of art classes, and I would follow her when I was quite young. And I never really, considered myself or said that I was creative. Mm-hmm. It was usually a label that other people gave me.
Like an implicit thing, you would say.
Mm-hmm. I would say, as I was young and I was very good at drawing, I was very good at making things with my hands. I could make a lot of things that I couldn't have.
Do you remember anything you made in classes? One of your first crafts things you created?
So I liked creating new things, and back in the day, we with friends, we used to play with these little race cars, these radio-controlled race cars. And what we did was we would go to this little shop, and they would have these plastic forms of the cars in clear, and you would paint on the inside and put it on top. And there was a guy back there who had a vacuum former. I didn't know it was a vacuum former, but he could vacuum form these shapes. And so I went there a couple times, and my friends were really into these race cars, and I thought, I'm going to build my own vacuum former, or this thing. So I gathered some metal plates and a heating tray and a old vacuum cleaner and screwed a whole bunch of things together and finally created a vacuum former that to make these little toy cars. And I spent a week building this whole thing. And after I built the thing, I made a few cars and I was off to the next thing. So,
so using the things you've created is not really your thing. You're more like into the creating process, and then you get bored if it's ready. Is that the thing, or?
Exactly. I think this was something that my father brought up later on with this vacuum former. He said, it seemed like I was interested in creating this vacuum former to create cars, but in reality, I was into solving my problem. My problem was I needed something to make these cars. But then after I solved that problem, I was off to the next problem. Yeah.
Nice. I can relate to that, actually. I mean, I don't know if you know this online, or no, it's not an online, but it's a computer game, I guess. It was called Sims in Germany. I don't know if that was a global name.
You build cities and so forth, right?
Yeah, typically you build like your own house, and you have like people living in your house, and then you can play basically a real life of people, let's say. But I was only interested in building the houses and creating something. But then this typical like just living in there, like, I don't know, going to work and taking care of those people in the house, that was really boring for me and stuff like that. So I also I can definitely relate to that. But I never thought about this in the relationship to creativity. But I think it's interesting. So is that, I mean, you're now owner of a company.
Yeah. So
how did you transform? Because just before we started the conversation here and recorded it, you shared a little bit about your journey from design school to now like startup owner and like scaling up. And you shared that like designing or the creative part is not always like 100% of your job is creativity, but probably just a little bit of it. So how do you deal with that? Because I assume that your story out of your childhood is now reality as well, that you at some point are able to create something, but then probably some parts of a job that you don't like so much, not related to creativity. I don't know. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, the creativity was just part of my way of working, right? And that obviously I took that into school. I got a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Design in solving problems, creating products to solve problems on a mass scale. And I started out with designing, and that's basically a creative way of solving a problem through a product. Yeah. And after doing that, I moved to Shenzhen, China for about 5 years for a Canadian company. And there I did a lot of manufacturing, quality control, and sourcing. And basically I would take designs that these concepts that would come over, and I would make it manufacturable. Okay. And to hit price points and so forth. And so it was still, you still use creativity in sort of solving the problem of how to manufacture something. Yeah. But it wasn't in creating necessarily a new product, because
more like bridging the gap between here's an initial draft and then make it manufacturable.
Exactly.
Basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so I did that for about 5 years, and I moved then to Munich for a home and living company called West Wing to help them develop their private label department. And that was about taking sort of data of products which were doing well and designing based on that, then sourcing that in Eastern Europe and in Asia. And that then became more more a managing of products and data of what works well, what sells well, price points, and so forth.
Was that still creative enough for you in that time? Or when you think about that now, looking back?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I use the methods of creativity to solve any type of problem, whether it's I think that, creativity is happening all the time. I think everybody is creative. I think that it is a skill that is worked on more by some people and less by others.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not really considered creativity until it becomes something, whether it's something like a product or a solution to something that somebody says, wow, that was a very creative way of doing that. And we do this every single day. I can give you an example of in the current company we're doing right now. We had a project that we wanted to allow people to get our product and test it for 30 days. And
for free.
For free.
Yeah.
And then after 30 days, they would get charged if they don't return the product. And sounds like a simple idea, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there just isn't anything in the market for that.
Okay.
There just isn't anything to facilitate this purchasing platform. And we had to do this really fast. And so our IT guy, basically, who was developing it, we said, okay, we're going to use PayPal to do this. And PayPal basically allows you, when you purchase a product, allows you to capture it within 3 days. Okay. However, within 3 days, you can prolong it another 3 days, up to 30 days. Okay. So he created a software that basically...
Little API.
That's right, to basically refresh every 3 days until we got to the third.
You didn't do that manually?
No, we didn't do that manually. And so it would refresh it automatically after the third day. And he went to the guys at PayPal and he said, listen, I'd like to do this. Is this okay? And the guys there said, wow, we've never seen anybody do that before. Good for you. That's really interesting. You found a sort of loophole to do a 30-day payment term. And that for me really excited me. And when he was talking about this and saying, this is what we had to do, I stopped him. I said, hold on, back up a little bit. Say that again. Yeah. I mean, that is creative. That is really cool. Yeah. And it's not something that you just sort of, skim over. Yeah. And
it's not always about the very big things, right? So creativity can also be like a little twist, little tweak, basically, right? Yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I don't know if that story was already finished.
No. I think that's basically, in a nutshell, that everybody uses creative ways to solve problems every day, whether it's a software problem or just communication, right?
Yeah, totally agree. So that's why I'm coming from research, and I just in the quick chat we had before this podcast, I just shared that we're responsible for creativity at Siemens. And we're bringing a perspective in where we also think that creativity is basically everywhere. And creativity is a behavior. It's not just a simple behavior, but it consists out of 18 different individual behaviors. One of them is just asking questions, for example. Because I think at some point in society or when you talk to people, creativity there's so much so many different myths out there or misunderstandings in my point of view about creativity or also probably this over-exaggeration about creativity needs to be this big and it's about really huge new inventions and stuff like that. So we thought, okay, bring it back. It's in the end a very simple thing. It's a behavior. The more you understand the 18 behaviors, the more you cultivate those in your life, the more you harness basically your creative potential. And you can imagine if we say creativity consists out of behavior and questioning is one of them. I mean, how often do you question things? So that's where we try to say, okay, creativity is really a daily thing, right? But if you look out in the world, when you talk to people, do you think, or are you annoyed of any perspective on creativity, anything that you would say, hey, that is something I would like to correct, or this is my perception of creativity? It's anything out there? We had a chat about, hey, creativity is a buzzword right now. It's also kind of a hype, right? Is there anything you would say to that?
Yeah, I think that, when I was younger, creativity was more of a craft thing. It was more of for people who were painters or artists or sculptors, and when they created that product, people would say, wow, this guy is creative, or this guy isn't creative, right? And what they expressed is creativity. Whether or not he's creative or not is what people sort of project on him, you know? And that goes back to what I said, you know, I never said, hey, you know, today I'm a creative guy. You know, I want to be creative and I'm going to start telling people I'm creative. It was more of something that is bestowed on you by others, you know? And an artist that is not skilled and doesn't create anything that's impactful, people don't say he's creative.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
And if this artist makes something beautiful, but he just copied it exactly to something else that already exists, people say, you're not creative, you just copied the guy, right? And so the creativity aspect, that's how I see creativity. Now, back then, this is sort of, you've got, people sort of see, okay, you go to art school, or you're a artist, or you're a starving artist, you know? It was this sort of group of people. It's these group of people, right? Musicians or whatever. And then you've got the corporate world, and then that's serious. This is serious business that we're doing over here. And you've got the creativity, and we've got the business over here. And what's really interesting is in the past, you know, 10, 20 years with this whole sort of concept of design thinking. And that was sort of the transition of, you know, saying design and bringing that into the corporate world and saying, why don't we use these methods of solving problems and bring that into the corporate world and try to solve problems with this sort of with this mentality of brainstorming and mapping out what the problem is. I mean, in reality, everything, it's basically just a problem, right? All the way down to the artist. The artist sees the world in a certain way, and he cannot communicate that to you. And he communicates that to you through a sculpture or through a painting, and that is what you perceive, and you say, oh, this used to look like a brown building to me, but wow, you perceive it differently. That's a real creative way of looking at the world. And that's about problem solving. And then in the corporate world, I mean, it's about you're bombarded with problems every single day. And as the example of the PayPal thing, I mean, that was a problem, you know, and you can do it in a couple of ways. You can either go and pay a lot of money and have somebody develop from scratch a payment system, or go and find some system that already exists and pay a lot of money for a service. Or you could be a little bit creative and say, how can we just tweak something and still get the result without spending a lot of money? And that's where it comes into the corporate world, and that is where all of a sudden, that becomes a bit interesting for the in the business world, because wow, I'm getting a better margin on this product. I'm saving money over here. You know, this is adding to my taken away from my overall spending, and that's all of a sudden. Now creativity, back to what you were asking, now creativity becomes, this is a very cool thing. We need more creativity here. And the question is, how do you get creativity in to support you without just having creativity there and saying, now we've got creativity, put it to work.
Exactly. That's the challenge. Yeah, I love that perspective. And I totally see that. I think that's the balance, or not the balance, that's not the right way of putting it, but rather the challenge, I don't know, that still, I think a lot of people talk about it, but they don't really live that or do it in a way. But it's always the same. If there's like a hype about something, a lot of people tend towards talking about things, right? And expectations rise, of course, right? But yeah, it's still a challenge how to bring that really into the business life. But I think, like as you said, it's coming from design thinking, it's coming from the design perspective and world, and I think we're in a good way. But what is really interesting to me as well, because you shared that you're like loving this crafting things and creating things, but was there something in your life where you say that was something that stopped me to be really creative? Anything that you have in mind? Any anecdote, any story to share?
I think in the way that I work with creativity or being creative, is I find that to be creative, and specifically when you have a problem, it's about being a little bit crazy, being a little bit irrational, being a little bit sort of trying to sort of think outside of the box. A lot of people call this brainstorming, they call it mind mapping. It's really about having good banter, talking to other people on your same wavelength, and bouncing ideas that are not restricted to making money, to whatever is accepted, and to really think outside the box, right? Yeah. And I always, even with product design, I always think, hey, why don't we start with insane? You know, why don't we go from the opposite spectrum? Go with an insane idea and just keep it going, really insane. And then from there, go back to sane. Because usually there's an essence to that insane idea. It's not just craziness. There's something about it that's interesting. There's something, and then you start boiling it down and say, okay, well, what exactly is it about this crazy idea that makes it interesting? And you start stepping back and you start to go to sane. You kind of get back to reality. And that's when you can, instead of working from, let's go with a product that makes us this margin, and then what can we do with that? You know, instead of saying, hey, let's make this product and then try to go and sell it to people. You know, it's working from the opposite side of saying, how crazy would that be if people were able to do this? Or how crazy would it be if we had something like this, and then work from there?
And how was your experience? I mean, you also had the time in corporate world. Did you see people being open enough to this kind of approach for solving challenges, or did you also see people like saying, "Hey, come on, Adin, that's a little bit too crazy. Please stop that." Yeah. Anything you've seen where probably other people like tried to block that way of being creative? I don't know.
I think that it needs to be in a right atmosphere. It has to be in a controlled atmosphere, and you have to, like I said, you have to banter, and you have to be on the same wavelength with the people that you're talking to, right? So you may have a design meeting and come up with an idea and just sort of, brainstorm on that concept and be a little bit crazy, but you wouldn't have that same thing with a customer in the room, because all of a sudden, hey, they want to see something else. And so it's if you're ever in that situation and somebody says, well, hey, but that's not doable, then you're not in the right mindset. And I think that sometimes you have to be in the right mindset. You have to be rational. You have to think critically, and that's very important. I think that to think rationally, to be very serious, to manage, to hit KPIs, to really sort of, get down into the nitty-gritties of the numbers and turnovers and all this stuff, that for me kills my creativity. That for me makes me sort of step away from that. So there's these two sides, right? And so when I'm in this creative mode, I don't want to hear whether or not it's doable. Yeah. I just want to explore. I want to have the feeling that anything's possible. I like the feeling of coming up, and then when you bounce an idea and you suddenly hear something that's very interesting, and to be able to accept it. And then that doesn't overlap in these two different worlds. So you really need these two different sides to balance. That's
a wonderful picture, exactly for what we typically call it as diverging. So opening up the space, that's what you were explaining as like no limitation, just let it go. And then at some point you need to converge again, right? Boil it down to like whatever is doable, coming back to numbers and criticism and all that stuff. And we use that framework, like diverging, converging now a lot, to also train leaders and like get that message across, because I'm totally with you that you need to separate that. You cannot do both at the same time, right? But the question is typically, when do you know to move from this, let's explore and be crazy, back to, okay, now let's get back to what's doable and stuff like that. Do you have any perspective on that? When do you feel that? When should you move over to the numbers? How do you manage that?
Well, I think when you have a problem, right, whether it's a product, specifically for us, it would be a product, and when you have that problem, you're coming up with a whole bunch of different solutions, right? There's a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
What do they say? 9 ways to skin a cat, right? And it doesn't mean that one way is better than the other. It's there's just a bunch of different ways, and when you have all these different ways, then you take these sort of the essence of these different solutions, and then you say, okay, now how do we turn this into a market relevant product? How do we, we could spend all day on this and we could create something, but a product that's too expensive will not sell. And so we're basically there's a lot of time spent after that point, right? There's a lot of money spent. So you have to be rational at that point. But then at that point, you're in a different phase, right? And so then you look at that. Now, maybe you need to go back and you need to sort of
Open up again.
But usually you sort of finish that and then you go into this sort of more strategic.
But it's also, there's not a quite perfect rule for that, right? But it's like
it's a feeling.
It's a feeling, exactly. Yeah. So it's experience. The more often you do that, the more you have the right feeling to do what in what situation, right? Because that's especially when you talk to people who are not like experienced in, let's say, those creative approaches. The typical answer is like, tell me when to do what, right? And I'm always coming back to like, and that creates headache for me, right? Because I'm like, there's not a perfect rule. It's like a craftsmanship, right? It's like you have to feel that. And I typically compare that to, I'm an engineer by training, and before we're allowed to do our engineering program at university, we do like an internship before that. And in that internship, I had to actually, I don't know, there was a metal block, let's say, right? And I had a file and some instruction to like get this round curve here and like this angle there and stuff. So I was working with my hands and arms, let's say. And the thing is, we did that for a whole week. And I was super frustrated because I didn't get it right. And then the instructor went by and was just laughing at me because I was so frustrated. And he just said like, Toby, now you learn what a craftsmanship is. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, craftsmanship? What do you mean by that? And like, look at you. You have the material you're working on, the metal. You have the file, so the tool. And you have all the instructions to do everything perfectly right. But still you're not able to do it. Why? Because it's a craftsmanship. It's something you have to feel in your arm, yeah, right? So it's not somewhere out there, someone who's able to tell you more and tell you a rule, and then you can do it, but you have to train it. And I think the same is true for creativity. But this is very often the misconception that people think there needs to be a next perfect method, rule to follow this rule or the 5-step approach, and then everything's done. But I think it's so much more about having an in-depth understanding of creativity and how it works, and then creating this experience and the feeling of, okay, now I'm in the space to open up everything. Let's move over to whatever nitty-gritty number thing. But then, it's not doable. Let's move back, right? But this decision to now let's move back, open up the space again. Nobody can tell you to do that. You have to feel it, know it yourself, or at least try it out, right? So I don't know, is that something you can relate to?
I would say, it's very difficult, as you said, to sort of balance that out, right? And specifically, I know this because being, a designer but then also running a company, you have to do that. You have to balance it. And so I think I sort of slowly went into this, first with manufacturing and then going into sourcing and then into having your own company. You have to sort of have this feeling. But a lot of times in companies, what they'll have is you have sort of the project manager, and then you've got the designer, and then you've got the designer, and he's just going nuts. He's doing a lot of crazy things. And the project manager is saying, okay, listen, we've got a project that we have to work on here, and this is that you give it all to me, and then they do the rational picking and choosing. And then the designer saying, no, I really want to push this thing out. I really like this. And then they work together to sort of say, okay, what makes sense? And so you've got this sort of doorway that you have to cross before you get into manufacturing, right? And that in a design company, that's how it works. You have a lot of designers. So it would be junior designers who don't have a lot of experience, and but they have a lot of creativity. Yeah. They're able to sort of play with things, and they don't need to spend a lot of time doing the things that dampens creativity, like management or anything like time management or pricing or anything like that. And what they do is then they're sort of taken care of by the senior designer who has a bit of, they're also quite creative. They're not dealing with the nitty gritty stuff, but then they can also see, okay, what's going to be, what's going to work.
It's an experience, right?
And that's how they build this experience. And then maybe then they become a manager. And at some point, going from that direction, then they have this concept of saying, when should I be creative and when should I be, strategic? It probably is easier to come from a really free creative aspect and become more and more strategic to dampen the creativity than it is to come from the other direction of being very serious, very strategic, and then it's time for me to let go and be more creative. And that's really where the convergence is, right?
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, right. We have a lot of discussions with people that say like, okay, now Toby, after like listening to you, whatever, going to workshops with you, I understand what you're trying to do, but I'm now, look at me, I'm, 55, and I will never ever be creative anymore in my life. So that's too much effort you and I would need to put in actually to get the outcome. And at some point, I'm not willing to agree with that, because I think that any time in your life you're still able to be creative and to open up. But you're definitely right. Coming from this very strategic, serious thing, going to the other direction is pretty tough actually. And there's also, of course, a part in our brain. I don't know if you ever came across that, but the so-called neuroplasticity in our head, that's also something it's an aging process, right? So we lose that ability of, let's say our brain is losing the ability to reconnect in a very fast way. We do that very fast when we're young, and then we lose that over our life. And we lose that also a little bit. But there's also the assumption in the room, for me at least, that the more you are creative throughout your life, the more you also train basically your neuroplasticity up here. So also that is something, of course, you're not able to counteract the aging process, right? So not yet any medicine found for that. But you can counteract that. So there's a lot of discussion regarding that coming. Of course, I mean, you can imagine that Siemens is more like this serious, strategic, big corporation. And we're trying to probably pull them more into the other direction a little bit. So this is tough, but I still believe that there are ways to do that. Probably not easy ways, but well, let's see. But coming back, I mean, sorry for the little excursion here, but coming back to you, and I would just love to hear, I mean, you founded the company Kekz. You can just real quick explain what you do, and then share a little bit about how did you actually come up with that idea? So how was the very creative initial spark happening there?
Yeah. So Kekz basically started in 2020. My co-founder, called Taylor, he had this idea initially in the car where he had his, we both have Tony boxes. This is also a box for kids. Yeah. And he had this Tony box in
Can you just real quick explain? I know what Tony box is, but some people might not know. Yeah. I don't know. It's basically a box with speakers, and then you have different figures you put on. And then when you put it on, like a sound or a story, music is playing.
Yes, that's right. And so it's a good product for kids to control their own music and stories. So he was in the car and he had a problem that keeping his daughter entertained. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so he was thinking, okay, look, there's a problem here, and the Tony box is a speaker, and to bring that in the car, it doesn't make sense. And ultimately, he needed some kind of solution for that. And he went online and he found that there wasn't anything similar to that. And
basically a mobile form for the Tony box.
Exactly, that was something to go, right? Because the problem that Tony solves is allowing kids to control their own content. However, it's not good for on the go. And in 2020, we needed that, right? And so
for the pandemic situation.
Yeah. And at that time, I had the design consulting company, and he knew that I had connections in manufacturing and developing electronic products. And so he came to me, and of course, this problem is something that every parent has, right?
Yeah.
And I have 3 kids. You have to keep them entertained. And ultimately, you know, a lot of times what people do, or what parents do in the car or when they're on the go, is that they give a phone to the child to keep them entertained.
Yeah.
However, that's really not ideal, because the phone is not a good product for young children, because it overstimulates them, you know, and it might be a temporary fix, but after they watch the videos or play on the phone, it actually stimulates them too much. So music is good, audio is good, and so, you know, when I was younger, we had the Walkman. I had the Walkman, and
I remember that as well.
yeah, it was fantastic. I was able to play my own music when I wanted to, as many times as I wanted to. I could collect it. It was haptic. I could share it with friends.
Yes,
it
that
was
was a big
my
thing.
own collection. It was very, very nice.
Yeah.
And nowadays, that it doesn't exist anymore, because we all have a million songs streaming directly to our phones, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunately this technology sort of got rid of old tech, which was actually quite good for kids, and it was quite good for us when we were growing up, and that's where Kekz initially sort of formed. And so in 2020 we developed the concept of creating the headphone and with chips called cookies, and that activates the content within the headphones.
So you can just change the cookie basically for different stories and just put it in the headphone somewhere?
That's right. So basically the headphone has all the content within the headphone, and you buy the audio chips, and that way when you're traveling you can buy any kind of audio chip, plug it in, it just automatically plays. And so
so it's not connected to the internet or anything?
It's not connected to the internet, and it was taking sort of a general gesture, you know, taking these little cookie discs for a child to say, okay, if I want to listen to this, I put it on my ear. And when I put it on my ear, it starts playing. When I don't want to listen to this, I take it away from my ear and it stops playing. And this is so intuitive that a 2-year-old or a 1.5-year-old can use this product.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful story. Beautiful. And then, I mean, switching the perspective again a little bit more on the meta level, let's say, I'm curious about, I mean, that's the initial starting story, but then of course there's a lot of like creative process and creativity happening to make it happen, like bring it on the market. And what I'm very much interested in is the intersection between, okay, let's say we need to be creative, but there's a lot of technology that supports us to do that, for example. Anything, I don't know, your perspective on that, how did all the technology support you? Especially, I don't know if you've used that already during the last couple of years, but we're talking a lot about AI pretty recently. And I don't know, we're also in touch actually with like creativity researchers who are not so amused about this big discussion that some people think that AI is now overtaking our creativity. So some people on LinkedIn even write AI is outperforming human creativity. I would be very careful about those sayings so far. I don't know if you have any other experience in that, but that's just something you can also probably relate to in your journey with Kekz. I don't know. Any things to share there? Yeah,
I think for Kekz, it really started as a problem, and we needed a solution for it.
Yeah.
You know? And we had the solution at home, but we needed the solution for on the go. And we started with that, and then really sort of went crazy on the ideas and being creative and thinking, how could this work? What could these, you know, how would these chips function? And does every time you put the chip onto the headphone, does that download the content, or is it already on there? How do we get around that? How do we do that? How do we put more content on, right? Through updates. Now it's not mono, it's stereo. So we create our own content, make it 3D. And so now it's a 3D experience for the child. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of technology out there. But what should we include and what shouldn't we include? What makes sense? Does it make sense to make this product a Swiss Army knife of a headphone? Or do we want to solve the problem that we have, which is we make it really simple, very intuitive, easy to understand, and children use it and they'll love it. It's about the kids loving it and the parents loving it, And that was really the beginning, and we really went crazy in thinking. I think initially when we were developing such a complex product already, we developed this from ground up, from the design of the headphone, from the software, everything, from the ground up, and it's a huge task. And all of a sudden, we were crazy enough to say, let's start a subsidiary company to create own content for the headphones. I mean, anybody who would be rational would say, well, guys, let's get this thing done first before we start looking at a whole nother sort of company, right? And I think that, that's what's great about being creative and being sort of like thinking outside the box, because you just really say, hey, this has to happen. Yeah. We have to create this 3D experience. And that allowed us to really sort of develop this product from a core reason. And technology with AI and everything like that, yes, there's with the technology today we can make this headphone very complex. We can do a lot of really cool things with this, but the simplicity is actually nicer sometimes to have that. And AI is definitely a great tool, I would say, in the development of the product, in sort of being creative, as what I mentioned before, in a sparring partner or bantering. AI is good for doing that, because even though some of the stuff that comes out of ChatGPT makes no sense at all right now, they're getting better and better. It's still something that you can filter out what it's saying. Okay, this makes no sense, but wow, this is interesting. How did it get that, right? And so then you start taking these concepts and developing it.
Yeah. And do you think that AI is creative? Is it overtaking our creativity?
I think that AI can be used as a tool to enhance creativity. I think creativity is about a personal expression of how you see the world and creating something out of it.
So what is the thing that a human can do what an AI cannot do so far, let's say?
Well, I think the AI is very data-based. It's basically data-based, and it is mathematical, and it calculates the best option based on all the information that it has. So the more data that it has, the more information that it has, the better it can create, the more precise of a solution it can create. I believe that people have what people bring in with creativity. And you can say that that's creative, right? The AI could create something and you're like, oh, that's creative. But what it's doing is it's taking a lot of data and spitting out a combination. Where humans bring in a lot of feeling. They can empathize. They can. There's love. There's a lot of intrinsic feelings and emotions that humans bring in to the product, and that AI can't.
That is important for creativity, you think?
Yeah, and when a product is made through creativity, it creates an emotion, and you need to have humans involved in that. But you can use AI to help get you there.
Yes, it's like an augmentation, let's say, right?
Yeah, and it's a fantastic tool to do that, and it can generate a lot of things visually, so that you can take your experience and then take bits and pieces from what it generates and say, I'll use that, I won't use that.
Yeah. I like that perspective. I totally agree. So I think it's a lot of power lies in AI and the potential you can use that. But I think there's also a risk of, like, if people assume that AI is now overtaking our creativity and the job is doing the job for us, I think that's a big risk, because I think it's just as creative as the person that is using the AI, let's say. So I think it's just an augmentation, but it's a powerful augmentation. Wonderful. Switching perspective again a little bit, but you're doing a product for kids, right? So I guess in one of the quick chats we had before the podcast, you also mentioned something that you think it's important to encourage creativity in children. And yeah, that's part of like the job of parents, let's say, and educators as well in school and stuff like that. But also in this, let's say now we're talking about AI, like what's the role of creativity for children and the encouraging role of you as a father, for example, in this relationship. There's more and more AI coming to the world. And let's say those are the children that are growing up with AI in their life right at the beginning.
Well, creativity is a skill that you need to encourage. And children have a lot of creativity when they're young. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible sometimes the things that even a 3-year-old will say, and you think, wow, that's incredible.
Do you have an example of your kids? Anything that pops up in your mind?
I can't think of anything specific, but you know, it's about taking their experience and then taking that and then reflecting it in another situation, and you're like, okay, I see where you're coming from. Yeah. I see where you're coming from. That's very creative how you somehow use that strategy. It's a strategy to in this specific situation. I think I can't think of an exact example at this point, but I think that, you know, children, you see this through play. When they're playing and when they're doing things, they're very creative in playing. They make things, they put things together, they build things, they draw things. It's a very creative process, and children, it's promoted that children will do this, and then at some point, probably when they go to school, it's serious time. It's time to get down to math. It's time to get down to history. It's time to, really, stay on time and be very strategic in what you do, get into health, sports, all this stuff. Really, really good. But play is sort of now looked at as, what kids do, And I think that also goes back to what you were saying, how do older people say, how can they bring out more creativity? And then you say to them, hey, you got to go play a little bit more. Oh, I don't have time to play.
Yeah.
I can't, there's no time for me to go outside and build something out of sticks and stuff. But in that process of playing, that's really important. And that is why the product that we're developing, this headphone that allows children to be independent, right? Without a screen. To allow them to experience and play and draw and listen and learn.
Imagine things.
And imagine.
They don't see it.
Yeah, use their imagination. Have fantasies. This is what sparks creativity, and this is why it's so important that we wanted to take phones and screens away from our children, because it's numbing. They watch this and everything is spoon-fed to them. They don't need creativity. Yeah. They don't need imagination. They need consumption. They need time to consume. Yeah. And that is what we want to sort of stay away from. And we want to get into more sound, magic, fantasy. Yeah. And this product we've had in the market for 2 years now. My kids have been using it for 3 years, and it's something that is fantastic because it balances them. Yeah. It brings them back to a more balanced behavior. One of the things that I figured out with our children, and I think with a lot of children, is that, kids don't have the ability to control their emotions. Mm-hmm. And it takes only little things to sort of get them out, and then suddenly they blow, and that's when they start crying or throwing a fit. Mm. And sometimes you just have to, when they start picking up, you have to bring them back. You have to balance them back to a more balanced mode. And we find that, for them to listen, sometimes my son is a bit, he's very highly sensitive, and definitely would not give him a phone for him to calm down. It actually does the opposite. I let him listen to the headphone, and he listens, and he knows when he's done, and he puts it down. Yeah. And then now he's normal again. He's back to being calm. So that is a very important aspect that we have.
Nice. I love that. And I think we could actually continue that for like another hour, because we already have roughly an hour. Time was running fast. I have plenty of more questions, but I think it's a beautiful point to end this conversation. I just have one last question to you, Adin. First of all, thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed the talk a lot, and I think there are some little stories that people will love, especially the one with the PayPal trick, let's say, or tweak. Given the discussion we just had, Adin, what is one thing you would like to share to the people, like an advice or anything regarding your personal experience and creativity you think that is relevant to consider?
Yeah, I think the big topic, and we talked about it, was AI, and we also talked about how creativity is this buzzword, and these two things are sort of coming together, and then you've got this sort of feeling of AI is going to take over creativity, right? Ultimately, I feel that we're in the fourth industrial revolution, where AI is coming in, and just like all the other industrial revolutions, jobs will be lost.
Yes.
AI can do a lot of things a lot better than what we can, right? And which is fantastic. And now artificial intelligence is going to take over many, many jobs from people, but also will create many, many jobs. Mm-hmm. And creativity is something that people in the future can use to navigate the world of AI. And I almost see AI as being a very fast car. Yeah. And in these different industrial revolutions, you had horse carriages, then you had faster cars, and it starts to get faster and faster. And now you've got electronic, Formula One cars that can just pick up super, super fast. Yeah. And I see the AI as a Formula One car. Uh-huh. Yeah? And I see the creativity as the driver. These cars are all very, very fast, but the winners are the drivers. They are the ones that control this really powerful tool. And by controlling it really well, that's where they will accelerate to something that's, mediocre, to something that's incredible, that's creative. And that, for me, I think is a good analogy of seeing how can you take creativity to that?
I love it.
To the next level.
A wonderful picture. Thank you very much, Adin, for sharing your personal insights, your story about Kekz, this wonderful little tool that helps little kids, I would say, to imagine and be creative instead of just using screens. I love it. And I wish you all the best for your endeavor for the Kekz company, let's say, making little kids a little bit more creative potentially. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Toby, thanks a lot for having me here. This is a lot of fun.
Wonderful. And I gotta stop by in Heidhausen for your shop
definitely,
in the future. So we're gonna have a coffee and then discuss that further. Thank you very much. And bye-bye, people.